So how on earth can you retain, how on earth can you guarantee that the affordable provision will be retained in perpetuity if the owner of some of the units would at some point in time no longer be bound by that same obligation that you're taking on as part of the build to rent scheme? I don't understand how that can work.
It's a good question, and I think one we've been working through, and as we said before, this is a 10-year blind scheme. It isn't affordable housing in a separate building as you would get with many other traditional schemes. So there are some complications. The affordable, again, it clearly is in perpetuity. The affordable won't be sold on after 21 years and end up in the hands of sort of in the market. Yes, after 20 years, when the covenant expires, the private units could be sold to another investor, but there's no way in which the affordable units can be lost to market sale. There will be a baseline provision in 106 which will set out, as per the tables that you've seen, a required mix in terms of unit mix and also income mix. And there will be a monitoring process, and that will make sure that is always maintained.
Could I also add that there is an agreement, the details being finalised around a viability review, and that was the point we were really making, which was, depending on the outcome of the actual project, when we have real numbers, there will then be a review of the returns against a benchmark return as the experts have set out. And that's the moment where, technically, if there is more return in the project, that goes to the benefit of further sort of housing subsidy rather than a bigger number than 35. So that's the really big moment, I think, when everything is reassessed based on the reality of the project. In 20 years' time, that should, this is about a very long-term investment, but should the units be sold in 20 whatever years' time it is, it's not a viability review moment. It is just that the affordable housing is locked in perpetuity on whatever the 10-year basis has been set historically. In 20 years' time, it will be the market housing that could change tenure, technically, and there would then be a recovery, should, in theory, there seem to be a gain from that tenure change in favour of the council. But, I think many people have struggled with 5, 10, 15 years. We're at 20 years. It's another sign of our commitment. This is a very long-term business with massive need in the long term.
Thank you. Can we now move on to bingo? Brilliant. There were a number of comments that talked about bingo. Who wants to give a response to that, please? And then members will ask questions. Whoever wishes to go first. No, you. Sam, do you want to do your introduction and say there are a whole number of comments that were made? What is your response?
Can I just be clear with the question so I can answer it out? Are we focused on bingo?
We are looking at bingo and the provision of bingo, or in first instance, the threat to the bingo at the moment, what provision would be made for the future, not only in terms of bingo as a leisure activity, but also some of the issues that came about as a consequence of the protected characteristics, and particularly what future provision you might make to ensure that older people are catered for within any future level provision, should it be bingo or anything else. Thank you.
Okay, well, I mean, stating the obvious, our proposals involve a demolition of the shopping centre, which brings with it the significant challenges that we've all been working towards and discussing tonight. In terms of bingo specifically, colleagues are in discussion with Mr. Duffy, and that's not a planning matter, that's a commercial matter, and that's somewhere else. In terms of what we now know about the demands for these leisure uses, and I think we need to differentiate commercial leisure uses, because on that side, from our consultation, I mean, we got a third of our respondents who consulted with us wanted you'll see in the consultation report, arts and films type leisure. In fact, from the consultation, we also talked about a music venue, which actually has sort of quasi-commercial community use. But I think the main issue here probably is around the community use and the community element. And clearly, with offices, there is a negotiation, and there will be an agreement around space that is provided for community use. All community groups, I think we have to think about the very wide community groups and the uses that they may want to put that space to work as, including, of course, the potential for bingo. So there's been an awful lot of careful thought, debate, discussion, and I think a resolution in that sense as to how we look at re-provision and make sure not only with bingo but actually uses are covered across community uses, community groups.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question?
If I could just add to that,
Oh, yeah, of course.
I think Radine mentioned it in her report. It's worth stating at this point that there's no planning policy requirement to re-provide bingo. That's the first point. But then, building on what Stafford has said, there is 50,000 square feet of D2 land use within our scheme. The build programme is 4 years from commencement, so there's plenty of time for us to work out what we think is the best possible fit of uses within the scheme. Finally,
Sorry, just for the benefit of everybody else in this room that is not massively conversant with use class designations, including me, remind us, what use class, what would you be allowed to do in D?
so D2,
Yeah.
leisure,
You could do.
includes bingo, includes cinema, includes bowling alley. There are various different
So
uses.
subject to licensing around gambling or
Yeah.
It's not being excluded as a consequence.
No.
not at all.
And just to add to the point that I made previously, because we've managed to release some space in the basement on the east side, we are committed to looking at what we might be able to do in that general area to potentially provide an additional leisure use, which could include bingo.
Adele, you lost anything?
No, I just wanted to pick up on a particular, on a statistic that you were saying. I wanted to clarify.
Okay, no, all right.
Sorry, Chair, just to jump in.
I just want to make sure everyone gets.
Yeah, no,
I wasn't sure that I heard correctly. So what did you say the floor space was of D2?
It's just over 50,000 square feet.
Of D2?
Yeah.
That's not what it says here.
square meters. They're all square meters.
Ah,
Sorry,
square
I'm
meters.
using,
Right, sorry, yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I am reminded on the basis that we have done this on a number of occasions and that we have to be reassured that you are fully conversant with, understand and are responding to our questions and concerns around the equality issues. And there were a number raised around the protected characteristics of people using the bingo, particularly older people and people of BME communities, and how they can be accommodated in any future uses in the future, particularly D2 uses. And I'm prompted by my legal.
I won't simply say yes, but I will, if I may, just refer to my expert colleague on this very technical, important area.
And you have to introduce yourself.
My name is Alba Phelan. I'm from Quad. I'm supporting Delancey on the equality side of the application. I think further to the point about that there's not necessarily a policy requirement to retain bingo as a use here. It's also important to remind the council about their public sector duty and what that entails under the Equalities Act. And that duty is to kind of consider and give appropriate weight and consideration to the potential equalities implications of any decisions you make, including a planning decision. That is not to say that those potential adverse effects cannot be weighed in other benefits. So it is to show that you have taken due consideration. Extensive amount of survey has been done in relation to this application and in relation to the uses of the centre and the uses of the bingo. And within the planning committee report, it's been quite clearly set out at various points what the potential impacts are. So I think it's quite clear to the committee and to the council what the potential implications are, and that's what needs to be considered within your decision-making process. That is not to say that those potential implications cannot be mitigated. And I think the mitigation that has been put forward is evidence to show that due consideration has been given. The relocation strategy is one element in relation to Latin Americans. In relation to the elderly, Delancey have committed to working with their future occupiers to look at potential programme events, potential additional floor space within the basement. And they also have existing programmes and support to elderly focused programmes such as the Ducky event, which is supports the over 60s within the area. So there's already an intention and evidence from Delancey about their kind of commitment to looking at this issue quite seriously.
That's fine. Thank you very much indeed. Can I just ask a very, very simple question? That were we to go forward with this, and this is a yes/no answer, you are all comfortable with what is being put forward would not preclude a bingo operator coming forward in the future to offer a service which is currently being described and analysed in terms of meeting not only the leisure needs of a group of people but also some of their protected characteristics. There is nothing that we are going to be considering that would preclude something similar emerging once the redevelopment has gone ahead.
Yes.
No, I didn't. There was that one full moment I realised there is nothing to preclude. Brilliant. Thank you. Are there any further questions relating to bingo? If there are no further questions relating to bingo, we then move on to which one was the next one? The retailers. And the provision. Does anyone want to ask a question about this? Sorry, does anyone else want to ask a question at this stage? Yeah, Michael.
As I was floundering around with the independent traders line, what are your plans for relocating, and what are your plans for people wishing to come back once the development is in place?
So again, absent commercial negotiations with business tenants, which of course have been progressing for the past 4 years and largely concluded. In terms of the package that's been agreed with council officers, we've been working to deliver essentially a package around consultation and financial support around assisting that relocation process. And in addition to the point you were referring to, I think earlier, actually working to create a database to show good businesses where good new units exist, and there are many of them. But and we're committed clearly to work towards that goal. In terms of and including within the wider Elephant Park, of course we work carefully with the council and with Lendlease around that emerging situation. We also have retail units in our phase 1 project where, I can't go into commercial discussion, but we are actively talking to Latin American operators, I can confirm, about units there. So, this is not a closure. It's not as if the world's going to stop and we are not looking to embrace a lot of the great things that are at Elephant already, but clearly we have to manage a practical issue of demolishing a town centre and building a new one, sympathetically as we can, but clearly it is a challenge. In terms of welcoming people back, our offer is 10%, in policy compliant. We made that change, and we're happy to make that change, of course. Of course, we are very open to businesses coming back to the town centre. Why wouldn't we be? I would only, as a business person, suggest that 2 moves can be a challenge. It can be very challenging to relocate, and I fully empathise with people running a business. They have to move. It is a challenge. To move again is another challenge. But they'd be very welcome to come back if they wish to do so. We're not closed to that at all.
And was I onto a red herring here with the dotted line, or could you perhaps update on what you envisage that meaning?
Not at all, because of course the whole area is we're looking at one application here, but of course the area that you've built a huge policy around, and then obviously actually delivered on the policy includes a significant amount of retail and affordable retail in the wider environment. Maybe Richard can give a more specific comments on that.
Yeah, I mean the lend lease scheme obviously generates its own requirement for affordable retail space. I understand that there is some in the zone that you pointed to earlier, and as Stafford has said, in the Elephant One scheme there is affordable retail, and also in the Skipton House scheme on the northern side of the roundabout. So not, and Perronet House as well. Sorry, where the council has just submitted its own plan application for some new retail space.
Would anyone else like? Are there any further questions people would like to ask about the trade bit? Would anyone like to ask a particular question about the policies issue?
My questions aren't about that at all. I just had a very quick point to make, which is, will people stop referring to Skipton House as an option because A, it hasn't even signed off yet, and B, it will probably be built. No, he did. You know, it's probably not built until after you've finished anyway.
No, I agree.
Okay, apologies.
We live in Hull, don't hold your breath, basically.
Could you reassure us that the equalities issues have been addressed in terms of ensuring the protected characteristics of the retailers have been recognised?
We can reassure you of that, yes.
Yeah, if you could just slightly expand, just to...
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm happy to.
I appreciate that.
I'm trying to.
I'm trying to move things forward and make sure we're covering everything. But I do think people behind do need to go through the 4 or 5 key points that you have taken into consideration when looking at their future needs with regard to their protected characteristics. And he would tell me I would ask that anyway.
Well, I mean, I won't repeat again. The package of measures that are designed to assist people with a relocation from obviously a town centre that's being demolished. As we said 4 years ago, you know, that was the starting point. You know, that's what we were looking to potentially deliver, subject to all the work we've now done. Is one key part of seeking to retain as many of those operators and traders in the locality as possible, whatever their background or whatever their ethnic or whatever other background, to retain in a broader sense those operators. It's a significant investment, a significant commitment. It is subsidy, frankly, coming in out of other bits of the project that is being put into this area to try and deliver on that very important objective. I mean, that is a broader answer. Maybe there's another point that my colleague might want to make.
No, absolutely. This is
Technical.
part and parcel. I'm sure we've covered the base.
Just to add to that, we obviously know about the relocation strategy and the support that Tree Shepherd are providing, but you know, an extensive survey has been done in terms of who the tenants are across the whole of the site, not just necessarily the traders, but also the other users as well. And in order to mitigate that potential impact, which has been well identified, it is looking at what that relocation package is, providing that support, and the database of the other available space within the area. I think it's quite important to know that Elephant as a whole has a Latin quarter, and there is only a proportion of it which is directly affected by this site.
Sorry, please.
And therefore, you know, this clustering is quite crucial, and that's well documented. But displacing these uses from this particular site doesn't necessarily have to decimate the cluster as a whole. And the support that Delancey and the council are providing through Tree Shepherd and the relocation strategy assists in ensuring that that cluster can be retained.
Are there any further questions, Sarah, and then we move on to Tara?
I think it fits in this part. There was a specific point raised by one of the objectors about the social space that's provided within the corridors of the shopping centre, and it's what consideration has been given to the value of that, both in terms of the community that space is being provided for, and whether it can be, whether it will be recreated within your proposals.
I think in relation to the social space, it's well documented that particularly elder people use shopping malls for social reasons rather than just for shopping, and that it's a safe place to go and to congregate. But we are redeveloping a new accessible town centre with high quality public realm, which will be, you know, accessible to the area with improved linkages. So therefore, that isn't to say that that value won't be rebuilt into it. There will be a time where it's going to be in flux, and what people know now won't be there. But I don't know whether there's a design point that maybe you'd like to comment on, specifically relates to that.
Is there anything further to add, or are we content with that answer?
I think just also to add the equalities impact assessment that's both been submitted by the council, by the applicant and through the council. It does look at accessibility of the space and that as a benefit in terms of good new design and how that improves the accessibility for elderly people, people with disabilities and people with mobility issues. So that's a benefit as well.
Okay.
Before we move on,
Michael, yes.
Before we move on to the Tabernacle, could we perhaps, as we have the Vice Chancellor of the London College of Communications here,
I was going to deal with the issues and the last one is not to make the journey.
so you take it in whatever order, it would seem to be a pity to pass up the opportunity.
No, I was going to. Tabernacle. There are a number of comments that were made, particularly about parking, which is an issue, but there was also the one around during construction and ensuring that young people and congregants are not going to be impacted by it, and there was also a concern about missiles being hurled out of the building. Who is Arturo? Are you? Lucky old you.
Thank you, Chair. So,
and respecting the listed nature of it.
And sorry, Chair, there was an issue raised around wind, which I'd like some clarification on that and further explanation. A wind issue.
Yeah, no, I'll get that down as well. Sorry. Brilliant. Arturo?
Artur, without Dio. It's okay. Okay.
Arturo.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right. One at a time. So on parking, we're not altering the existing street layout around the Tabernacle. The area where the vans are parked in greater numbers during the weekend is not part of the demise of this planning application. I can only suspect the concern is that moving forward with the implementation of the scheme, there might no longer be the relaxation of the control of the parking restrictions that are in place, and that the council might enforce those, but that's not something we can respond. I think Southwark as a council should address that aspect. Second point has to do with these. I'm not familiar with the phenomenon of the missiles. I can only suspect are objects precipitating from the elephant. Arguably, objects falling from a building onto a pavement or a public ground is something that can happen literally from every building in London facing a public street, or every building in the world. What I would say is that the chances or the possibilities of that occurring from the particular building that is facing the Tabernacle are highly mitigated or very reduced by the fact that there's only a couple of balconies directly looking onto that title boundary, and the windows onto the bedrooms and living areas are actually non-openable. So there is a much reduced possibility of that occurring, certainly accidentally. If someone is determined to throw things around, I don't think any housing development can stop that happening. I will also say that the balconies are recessed. We think that's a better solution for amenity and at high levels, but it also means that it has one face exposed and not three. So there are three reasons why that risk is minimized. In contrast, to offer a point of reference, the elephant has 4 different balconies. They are projecting balconies, and the windows are openable. So that's all I can address in relation to that point. In relation to the listed building, I should point out this is a building with a very interesting story. It's had a number of metamorphoses over its history. At the moment, it's only the front of the building that is, if you want, a survivor of the different events throughout history and more recently the bombing during the Second World War. So the element that is listed is not the entire building, it's the portico, the temple front to Newington Baths. And there's been very careful consideration. The head of design and conservation sitting on the table can testify that this was something that was identified from the very beginning. In this sense, One the Elephant had set a very strong precedence in relation to the height, material, rhythm, relationship it had with that listed facade, and we followed that guidance. I would also like to point out that the existing college building is directly abutting that building. That's a rather natural relationship to that listed facade. The new proposed building is of a reduced scale, more sympathetic in materials. It does relate to the rhythm of the columns, establishes a line of symmetry with the lower component of One the Elephant at the other side. But it is also detached from that listed facade, and we are securing listed building consent in accordance.
I think those were the three main points that came up from the Tabernacle. Were there any other points on that? The wind.
Wind and noise from a potential D2 use of the adjacent building to the Tabernacle.
I'll deal with the wind point first. It's covered in the report, paragraph 686 through to 692. Wind testing was undertaken as part of the environmental impact assessment that was submitted with the planning application. That wind assessment has been independently reviewed on behalf of the council. It did identify some minor adverse effects, but it's felt that they can be dealt with through additional mitigation, and indeed the draft recommendation includes a condition which not only requires that additional mitigation to be put in place, but also for us to do 2 additional tests in close proximity to the Tabernacle, which I think is something that was raised by the council's independent consultant.
So how potentially could that be rectified should it appear to be a realistic problem?
I think where the Tabernacle is concerned, we'll only know if it's a genuine problem once we've done the additional testing. And I am assuming that through the planning condition, we will need to submit the outcome of that assessment, and if it shows that further mitigation is required, then we will be required to do it. Well, I mean, it could be additional tree planting, or it could be physical screens. I mean, there are numerous different ways that you can design into public realm ways to mitigate wind to make it more comfortable for pedestrians. But we don't. The honest answer is we won't know until we've done that additional testing.
And then there was the issue about the noise. Transmission from the venue to the transmission of noise from the venue to the church.
Okay, that's good now. Okay, this is a point that is highly technical and very difficult to summarize in a didactic way. I think that the best I can do is offer comfort by saying that one of the advantages of a rental scheme is that the client, the developer, has a fairly long-term interest in how the scheme evolves, how the scheme is maintained, how it passes the test of time. That also involves the impact that the music venue could have on the residential nearby. So I think it's
on the church.
Yes, I know, but I'm
sorry.
Yeah, but basically the point I'm trying to make is that if this music venue was noisy by any measure, the one that would be most affected in the first place is the particular developer who has a huge number of flats in closer proximity than the Tabernacle on the market for rent. So that's in line of comfort. On a more technical level, I will say that this is a music venue that follows the principle of a box in a box, where there is a fairly substantial cavity around the entire stage box before you get onto the envelope. This is not something innovative. This is tried and tested, and it's up and running in a number of venues in London close to residential amenity.
If I could just add to that as well, that it will be controlled by planning condition. We will be required to submit details of what our facade design is. Obviously, we don't know exactly what that will be right now.
Thank you. That bit could be conditional. I've got Sarah and then Hamish, and then we move on to university. Oh right, Hamish, it's yours been answered.
No, sadly not, sorry. There was a separate sort of strand of the question to the music venue which came out from the objectors, I think, about the use of it and whether it was in effect going to be a nightclub or whether it was what is the proposed use of it, what are the hours, how will that manifest itself, what's the likely impact from the use of the...
Okay, so when one talks about these music venues, one has to make a distinction metaphorically between the hardware and the software, if you follow me, hardware being bricks and mortar, software being the actual activity that happens within. On both accounts, we followed very closely the guidance from GLA in their grassroots music venue guidance. The idea behind this, trying to be very succinct, is that London is doing very well on the large venues, the large nightclubs. What's happening is failing to maintain or deliver new music venues where those stars of tomorrow that will be performing in front of 15,000 people can do their first gigs, become popular, get that sort of initial exposure. This is exactly the sort of offer that initially at this point we had in mind. This is not a nightclub that operates in the very late hours of the night. This is sort of evening, early hours of the night type of performances like you have in some local pubs or stages. The only point to make is that it has a capacity that is sustainable economically and does not rely on subsidies.
To add to that as well, I mean, I don't see this as a kind of traditional music venue that will only be used in the evenings. I think we see this as an opportunity to create a use that can, that people can go there and have breakfast meetings, whatever. There's going to be recording space in there that people can use during the day. So it's not a kind of traditional small venue music destination. It's not just that. It's going to be more than that.
And then just one minor point of detail, quite significant point of detail potentially. Are the hours of use of the music venue controlled within the planning conditions?
Yes, so it's 7 a.m. till 1 a.m.
Okay.
So there is a restriction there.
Are we happy with that part, the tabernacle, and we snuck in and got the venue in? Michael, do you want to ask your university question?
Well,
I just said. Oh, sorry. Did you have one more on this bit? Sorry.
Well, yes. Simply because they seem to be very clear about the use of that particular building being one of a music venue. Well, you've heard the support for the bingo hall. Is it something that you would consider changing your minds to a bingo hall?
I think at this stage we can't really confirm or otherwise. All we can say is what we've said already, which is there is 50,000 square feet, 5,000 square meters of D2 floor space within the scheme. And as we start to build it out, if we get planning permission, then it will be at that point when we start to think about exactly what type of uses are going to go in the buildings,
which could be bingo.
And the music venue, really came out actually as an output of all the consultation, people saying to us, what about that as an option? But as we say operationally, we're not closed to other ideas as we progress.
And then we move on to university.
Sorry, Chair. So just to pick up on that, you say that the music venue came out of consultation. Was that in reaction to the fact that they're losing the coronet? People were asking for a replacement for the coronet, or was there a theme about the type of music venue that people?
Did it come out of the coronet, and what themes?
I think a lot of the I haven't seen any direct correlation, honestly, between people saying that's gone, we want a music venue there. As well, one of our big consultees is the GLA, and you know, a lot of their commentary as well came out around creating that new music venue in the Elephant. So it was part of the consultation.
So when you talk about consultation, you weren't necessarily talking about the things that people who live locally might have requested?
It was a mixture. I'm sure it was. I think it will. If you look in the consultation response report, it does report specifically on that type of use within it.
Chair, earlier we heard about the risks, and one of the risks that was referred to was the London College of Communications. I wondered if there is a spokesman, not Vice-Chancellor, here, whether she would like to talk about the risks or the opportunities that this development may offer.
So our current situation is the building that we've got isn't fit for purpose for what we need to do within it. It was put up 54 years ago, before any of the technologies that our students use now. We've just launched a screen school. We've got substantial developments going on around film, television, games, visual effects, virtual reality. So they're all things that need big, open, green spaces in order for students to do what they need to do. The building's falling down around our ears. It costs me a fortune each year of student fees, quite frankly, that I have to spend just to keep our building going. I see abseilers off the tower block on a regular basis, making sure that the panels are fixed in place. It's a nightmare to work in. We've looked at several sites. I've been there for 5 years, and in the first couple of years we were scoping whether we could develop the site that we're on now. We can't do that. It's just impossible to do because we've got nowhere to displace people to. It would be far too disruptive to student experience, those that are paying £9,000 a year for their education. We scoped other sites. One proposal was Stratford, because one of our other bits of the university, London College of Fashion, is actually part of the Stratford development. So at one point that's where we were going. So when the opportunity came up at Elephant, I have to say that's where 100% of my community in the college were absolutely delighted to stay there, because I've got a very large number of people that have been born in the borough, live in the borough, work in the borough. We do an awful lot of work, and always have done, with the local schools and local communities as well, and we want to maintain that commitment because we're committed to being in the Elephant. I'm not sure if I said what you said, but anyway, if it doesn't happen, we can't stay in that building for, I don't think, any more than 5 more years, quite frankly. That's how bad it is for us at the moment.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions?
Sorry, Chair, there was a question earlier about who owned the site. We own the site. Yeah, it's our site.
Yeah, no, I provided that answer. You're quite right. It's not the council does not own the site. It is owned by the London.
Yeah, UAL. Yeah.
Are there any further questions, Adele?
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions. How did the idea come about of doing the shopping centre one? How did the conversations happen, and how did that end up being, given the complexity of everything else, how did that end up being a logical thing for you to get involved in? And the second one is, I'm really unclear from the report and then from the addendum, is it going to be the headquarters of UAL, or it's really, the reports are really muddling.
Shall I do the last one? Because I've clicked on quickly. The last bit is, yes, we're incredibly complex. We're actually 6 colleges in the university. I'm one of 6 colleges in the university, and my college makes up about 26% of the university. We have a site at High Holborn, which is HQ. It's what this is to Southwark, basically. So that's where the Vice-Chancellor sits, and a lot of our administration, student union, so that's where that all sits. So they will move over to Elephant with us. So there's capacity within the new building to bring them down with us. Because one of the things, I've actually worked for the university for 21 years. When I got there, we had 23 sites. We're down to about 16 sites now, 15 sites I think it is now, and we're trying to rationalise and make better use of very expensive spaces in London and be able to operate much better as well as far as an organisation is concerned. Does that make sense? So the university is 6 colleges that makes up the university, so the HQ administration bit moves down with us. Does that make sense?
As to the engagement, when we first invested in Elephant in 2010, we were talking to lots of people, including the LCC, meeting with Natalie, and also with the council. And when we acquired the shopping centre, having acquired other interests in other land in 2010 and 2013, we began a further dialogue where we looked at this as a town centre, not as housing with some retail. And the idea of keeping the LCC and the Elephant became a core principle of what we were trying to achieve, encouraged by the council, but actually encouraged by our own vision of what this new town centre should be. And we did the old-fashioned thing and went to see them and talked about it, and talked and talked and talked. 18 months later, we had the buy-in of the council and the Vice-Chancellor, and most importantly Natalie. Long, hard yards of dialogue to deliver. It's taken us probably 18 months to 2 years longer than it might have done to get that delivered. That's how it happened.
Yeah, and then I think we move on if everyone's comfortable with that.
So financially, how does it work between the two? And especially now that I know that the LCC is incorporating the headquarters of something else into the Elephant and Castle scheme.
The basic financial position is that the LCC, one of their key requirements was that they owned their building, not rented it. I could have happily arranged a transaction where they rented it. I was, open.
But they were less happy.
But they were less happy, and therefore that's what they're doing. They're buying their building, and on relocation we're contracting to buy their site. So it's all a sort of a loop at that moment when they relocate.
Are we now happy to move on? Thank you all very much indeed. I'm sorry about the length of time that you've been there.
Excuse me, there's a question.
There's a question on Network Rail which I'm happy to answer.
Oh, no, that's all right.
Questions that came from the front.
No, sorry, I'm more than happy. As I said all along, I thought we'd come to the end. Network Rail.
That was in fact my question.
Yeah, so obviously, well, could you clarify whether you do or don't own it, and if you don't own it, how does that impact on the scheme if anything goes wrong and you're not able to buy those arches?
Before we talk about ownership, I'd like to talk about land use and the critical issue of linkages and everything else. And again, we spent many months in the early stages looking at those connections. What was apparent was there was no east-west blockage in a sense. So the essence of that link through east-west was a critical part of the work we were doing in terms of trying to re-establish historic connections and in fact new connections, obviously with Elephant Park and that evolution. In terms of the ownership, we do not own those arches, but what we do own are 2 arches down the road on a virtual freehold basis where you come in and out of the shopping centre. And the commercial arrangements that we've agreed with Network Rail, but we have not documented at this point, are to essentially arrange a swap of those ownerships. So we give back the 2 we own and take the 2 we don't currently own. So that is a transaction that is agreed. It's not yet contracted, but it's agreed and is commercially rational in that sense of a simple swap.
You're absolutely right. Are there any other questions to ask of the applicant?
Yes, carbon emission is my favourite. So you're going to have to pay over £2 million to offset your carbon emissions. It's hugely frustrating. We talk about air quality all the time here.
Microphone. Yeah.
Sorry, apologies. So why is it that when you're doing a from scratch, brand new building, state of the art, etc., that you are still having to pay £2 million looking to the future is that we're trying to protect our environment, and why are new buildings not able to?
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is David Matthews, and I'm from Hawley. We've looked at it long and hard, and it's obviously broken into many different elements. Obviously, the residential and the retail, and some of the university elements as well. From a residential element, we are better than what we're currently indicating. So it's 31%. One of the key elements which sort of brings it down is the retail, which is notoriously very, very difficult to achieve a good environmental result on. And one of the things which we're obviously doing is maximising where we possibly can the inclusion of the energy centre, which provides a significant benefit to the scheme in terms of reduction of emissions, and where we can provide photovoltaics and renewables to provide an additional contribution. We're limited by the amount of roofscape which we have, because obviously we're quite tall towers, and we're trying to provide amenity space where we can, which obviously then limits the amount of available roof space for other renewable elements.
Okay. Is there any other comment? Sorry, question. This is questions at this particular juncture from the
I'll make it. Well, my question's quick. Do you have, as a body, a vision for the Elephant and Castle shopping centre? You know, the kind of things that you want to, the kind of shops, without naming them, the kind of cinema you might have, the kind of theatre. Do you actually, as a group, have a vision?
I'll give him that moment.
Please.
Can if I just talk about what the university's vision is at the moment for this particular development, is we've got an incredibly ambitious public programme that we put on, and it's really difficult in our existing building to actually encourage people to come in, because the building's impossible to manage inside. And it's difficult to get people over the steps, so hence why we took the unit in the shopping centre, and why we've been doing projects we've done projects in the park recently. We do them wherever we can. So for us, the first 3 floors of our building we'd like to see like the South Bank, which is very soft security, that we're able to bring people into the development, into our building. They can come in and have coffee, they can come in and see the work that we've got going on. We've got amazing archives. We've got amazing archives of the local area as well, of what's happened in the area over many years. We've got the Kubrick archive there as well, which is the Stanley Kubrick archive. We've got an exhibition that opens this week because it's the 50th anniversary of Space Odyssey. We do so much work with, as I said before, local schools coming in as well. So we run Saturday schools, summer schools, all kinds of different things. For us, it's difficult to do it in the building we have now, but we'd like to have a much more open, porous space in those first 3 floors where we're able to do a lot more public engagement activity. And the other thing is our graduates like to stay in the area, but they can't afford spaces to work in, but they're able to come back into these spaces and actually use those as meeting places. So a lot of our graduates, their workspace is their laptop. That's where they work. But they do need to still talk to people.
I mean, just to overlay that, I mean, the vision does start with the LCC. To me, that is the heart and soul of the place in terms of the daily activity, rather than just being housing and shops. And it was a challenge put to us, what is the differential about this new place? And I think the heart and soul being the university. I think it then leads into ideas, and there's only ideas at the minute about whether if that part of that D2 space is a cinema use, the enormous linkages that could be generated there between the university and its teaching in that specialist area, and actually having an imaginative operation that leverages off that very different thing. So I think there's a lot of the attributes of this new town centre will flow off that institution being at the very heart of it. And then probably Neil, just to finish, because of course the residential element, the neighbourhood aspects.
Very briefly on the residential, please.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the housing crisis, and I think we really maybe haven't got the point across of how we operate. And there was a concern earlier about it's a risk in terms of the housing. We're a professionally managed business. There's a huge demand for rental. In the UK at the moment, it's around 20%. We forecast for it to go up to about 25%. We're trying to do rental in the right way. You know, I said it last week when we had the community evening. There's always headlines about people charging huge fees, there's about deposits, etc. We've revised that, we've challenged that, and we've got to a position where we don't charge those. And I think we want to build a community for the homes that are there. We want to bring in more residents, and we want to bring in housing there. There you go.
If there are no further questions, thank you all very much indeed. Sorry about the Sorry about the Thank you very much indeed. Could we please have a brief comfort break? Back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Oh, sorry about the lateness of the hour.
We've got Lux Walk House. Suggest finding some accommodation.
Oh, I haven't got gone with it. I just I want to train at 5:40. Oh, exactly.
No, well, it's up to you if you want to go there.
There's one there. Do you think that one's this one?
Yes. Okay, I'm going to pause the live stream until the comfort break is over. It wasn't for me to. I was only going to say, I was only going to duck the question the same way as you did. I've been hassling them. I've been hassling everybody at that until what's going on with just their response to the consultation was due in December. Coming back to me just
There's two things. One is during the course of I'm not going to pronounce it. Texting loved ones and saying I'll be over in
yeah, I mean, at least that isn't so controversial. Usually, I was in design issues. Man of the van, I really appreciate Are you kidding? No. Well, we support this at being something like this. And so they give them a so that they I mean, it's all they'll never take it out now.
These days, look, that's not that is the yeah, so this is one of the everyone's back.
Sorry, do you want to...
Say hello. For board councillors for the LCC. No, I've been in your building, so I'm familiar with this current state.
Yeah.
So I do actually support I will be placing the applications on behalf of the residents. Also to represent the residents. You do need a new home for sure.
Hey, hi everyone, we're ready to start again. All the members are here. If we could all get together. We now go through the last parts of this process. Brilliant. The next person who can speak, or next people, category of people who can speak are people or a person who represents any supporters of the application who live within 100 metres of the development site. Is there such a person or people? Person or peoples? No. Are there any ward councillors who wish to speak? And you all wish to speak. Have you worked out how you're going to divide your time yet? If you would all like to come forward. And if you could introduce yourselves with the time from my left, your right, and as soon as the introductions have done, the person or people who are speaking, who's going to speak first? And then Maria. Brilliant. Do you... David, you've never been shy in making your... Yeah. Don't... I mean, I'll just share it 1.5 minutes each and then there must be...
We're going to be slightly less, so we'll just roll it.
All right, okay. Up to yourselves. Okay, David, introduce yourself.
Good evening. Still good evening. I'm Councillor David Nags. I'm one of the Cathedral's ward councillors covering the LCC side, the west side.
Good evening. I'm Councillor Maria Lynn from Southwark, Cathedral's ward, again on the west side.
Councillor Recaluri, I'm one of the councillors for East Walworth.
I'm Councillor Martin Seat, one of the councillors for East Walworth.
And I'm Councillor Darmel, one of the councillors for East Walworth as well.
Okay, so I will start. Just to say, Nick, we would appreciate if you could ask us all the questions that you previously said you were going to ask us, but what we thought we'd do with our time now is highlight our main objections to the scheme. So they are as follows. So on affordable housing, we think it's unacceptable that this development is still only proposing 33 homes at social rent. It's frankly unacceptable that the new offer reduces the overall affordable housing, doesn't change the figures on social rent, but in fact increases the number of properties for people who are earning over £80,000. This isn't compliant with either Southwark's own policy for Elephant and Castle, nor our emerging build-to-rent policy. On affordable retail, whilst the revised proposal is policy compliant, we don't believe that there are adequate protections and support being offered to the traders in and around the shopping centre, including interim provision and a right to return. On the bingo hall, we think it's unacceptable that the bingo hall will not be re-provisioned on the new shopping centre site. And on the resale of the estate, we think that the length of the proposed covenant of 20 years on the private rented element scheme is non-compliant with Southwark's emerging policy, which asks for a minimum of 30 years, and we share the concerns that have been raised by members of the committee about how the estate will be managed in the long term.
Thank you. As Cathedral Ward's councillors, we object to the development of in this current form. Firstly, it is not policy compliant. The plan delivers just 33 homes and social rented out of 979. Secondly, it discriminates against the BME communities in the retail offer. For instance, there is no right to return, there is no credible offer to maintain a cluster of business, and there is no solution to relocate the business during construction. Thirdly, it discriminates against older citizens by removing the bingo hall. Fourthly, the adjacent streets and the heritage asset, the Metropolitan Tabernacle, will suffer considerable loss of amenity. For example, our independent analysis contradicts the developer's statements regarding loss of daylight sunlight to Oswin Street, which will be severely affected, and significant loss will occur as far as West Square on the west and the Albert Triangle on the east, on the north. Residents of Perennote House had great concerns regarding the plans for the garage spaces. This is a brief outline of the concerns of local people who don't want to see all these things that they value swept away by a development that ignores the legitimate needs and desires. We welcome your questions.
Well, I would just like to re-raise very quickly the concerns and the impact on residential amenity of the residents who live in Oswin Street and also Hales Buildings. They are the ones, I'm afraid, who are paying the true costs and expense of this application. The impact on daylight and sunlight is considerable, and you only have to look at the words within the report, which says that the fact that the impact on these properties would be significant. Properties at Hales Buildings and the dwellings on Oswin Street would experience a substantial adverse impact in relation to sunlight. It's not just about the townhouses across the way, it's about the towers which were not mentioned in the applicant's discussion, and then obviously the impact on the Metropolitan Tabernacle, which I can answer more questions on.
Brilliant, thank you very much indeed. Staying on time. As I said, as I agreed, with your, you see, thank you. With your consent and your support, I will ask now a set of questions around the east side, which is, and the west side. I'll do the west side first because there's only two of you. Are there any particular issues that you would wish to raise over and above the ones that you already have, particularly around daylight and stuff like that, that you would want to say on behalf of your constituents on that side of the building? Is there anything you wish to say about the viability and the affordable housing offer, and is there anything that you would wish to say about the retail offer? Those are the three broad thrusts of the questions, and it is your turn, and you can make your comments.
Yeah. Is there anything you go first? I go later.
Okay, well, so in regards to impact on the residents, as well as obviously the substantial impact, and I think that's what members need to bear in mind, there is a substantial impact on daylight and sunlight for the Hales Buildings residents, and the Oswin Street residents. But there is also, as Councillor Morris has picked up, there's an issue about the servicing and construction phase. Oswin Street residents have already endured 4 years of construction traffic going down their street. This is a narrow residential street for the building of the leisure centre and One the Elephant. So this is not something should be lightly decided that further construction traffic is going to be sent down their street. The fact that servicing also appears to be being used down their street will also be used for servicing is another considerable concern, and I cannot understand how TfL unfortunately seem to be able to say no, and the council seem to therefore allow the residents to suffer the cost of that no from TfL. In regards to viability and affordable housing, I mean, I can only really concur with obviously the views of other ward councillors who've spoken about the impact on the offer that's being made. I mean, in regards to housing, I won't reiterate all the comments, but I mean, the fact is that there are concerns about the option that the developers have chosen. There's concern, I think, about how that's going to be managed in the future, about obviously as the 10 years after 3 years, people's rents are reviewed, and I'm not convinced that the mechanisms are in place to make sure that the affordable housing element remains in the numbers that are being proposed, as inadequate as they are. In regards to retail, I think as people have said, the offer is not really, there's no guarantees really for the independent traders, and there's a real risk to them in regards to their future viability, and also I think to the Latin American cluster, there's no guarantee of that in the future either. I think was that the 3 areas you wanted us to cover?
Yes. If there were other
just on the retail offer, just the other point I would make, because it's a sort of a linked issue, is that the proposal by the council to create new retail spaces in the garages of the Paranet House residents, despite the Paranet House residents making it very clear that they oppose that, an application has been submitted, is not the answer, and I'm not convinced that the retailers want to be stuck in the garages underneath Paranet House. Well, it's proposed as a solution.
It is quite a separate planning issue. The discussion.
But it is proposed as a solution, Chair.
It's that is a part of the regeneration discussion, not part of the planning discussion. I think we do need to separate that. I know it has been mentioned, as were a whole range of other things, but I think it is quite a separate planning issue.
Yes, I want to add something on retail because it is important to say this, that the impact of retailers and through them and their customers who they serve, the Elephant and Castle is recognized as a focus, for instance, for the Latin American communities because of the constituency of business. There is no credible plans to keep them as a cluster, which is very important and is something that they always want, to be a cluster. They are going to be dispersed all over the place, and there is no credible idea to keep them in one place again, I repeat, as a cluster. There are no real terms of return, and there are no terms that they could be really affordable when they return, especially because when they return, whatever the rate of affordable, which I don't know what that word means any longer, is only for 5 years. After 5 years, it will change possibly to terms that they could not afford, and therefore, I don't know, those people will not be able to continue to trade in the area. Thank you.
Has anyone got any questions for David Murray?
I just wondered whether either of you would like to add anything to the discussions we had earlier in regards to parking and the possibility of evening weekend parking on residential streets, which primarily I would suspect is on your side of the site, either from residential occupiers of the site or retail users or displaced users of the Tabernacle and other local facilities.
I mean, parking is certainly an issue already. There was a review of the C2 CPZ last year, which was to really deal with the sort of concerns that were already being raised by residents about how difficult it is for them to park. The restrictions at the moment are Monday to Friday, so there are no restrictions at the weekends and, as you say, in the evenings. Although obviously this is a car-free development, that doesn't obviously stop lots of additional visits by vehicles in regards to deliveries, in regards to servicing, in regards to taxis, minicabs, all of these sort of things that come with people, basically. So I think there will be an increased pressure on the parking in that area. Obviously, it's taken 10 years for us to have a review of the C2 CPZ. There may need to be another review very quickly because potentially, if this development goes ahead, I think there'll be increased pressure on their residential streets, and I think if residents were asked again, they may well decide to have Saturday and Sunday restrictions and even extended restrictions into the evening to try to protect their ability to park.
Are there any further questions of David and Maria?
David, what would be your alternative proposal to construction management? As you said, the Oswin Street residents, as the report stands at the moment, would be impacted upon. What would you suggest?
I mean, I don't claim to have the expertise to come up with the solutions, but what concerns me, I mean, obviously there needs to be a construction management plan and there needs to be a service management plan. I think there's discussion of both in the report, but I have to say that I think Southwark Council appears not to have stood up for the local residents in regards to this, or not to have fully considered the implications on those Oswin Street residents. They've put up already with 4 years, as I say, of construction vehicles going down their street, and anyone who's visited Oswin Street will find it's a very narrow street just to the west of the LCC building. You know, it does feel like if TfL say no, that we have to say yes, and that just doesn't seem to be adequate. I can't personally come up with an absolute solution to you, but I just feel that the vehicles need to really find an alternative route. So I appreciate that's not what's before you, but I think it's a flaw of this application, and it's a flaw that you should consider when you're making your decision.
Sorry, especially for the people on the north next to St. George's Road. It's going to be extremely difficult for them to live a life with vehicles, especially heavy vehicles, day and to early hours of the night, going through to the development. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? David and Maria. Exactly the same questions. To the other side. So, microphone. Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Have you anything further to add about viability and affordable housing? Have you any questions to ask? Sorry, have you anything further to add about the retail elements of this?
First of all, thank you, Chair, for allowing us to speak tonight. It's important to put this into some context, first of all, that we have a significant community, both in Latin American and BME community, who are retailers. And what we want to do as part of any future development is to ensure that many of those retailers benefit from the outcome of any major development of this kind. So we've heard from the retailers. First of all, they've all said quite clearly that they're dissatisfied with the interaction both between themselves and Delancey, and indeed the proposals to mitigate the effect of this major development. And furthermore, they've also said that if you look at the quantum space that's available in the new development, there's a 2,000 square metres loss to them. Therefore, it's impossible for as many of them, the majority of the existing traders, to return to this development. That is not genuine regeneration. What we're effectively doing is dismantling, and in fact, by virtue of our action, deliberately moving a community out of an area that they've been resident for more than 20 years. And that has to be unacceptable. So that's the context. If we now look at what is actually available in terms of affordability, if the current affordability says that at least 5% of that should be at a truly discounted rent. If we consider the environment that they've been operating in for the past 10 years, whilst of course there's been some uncertainty about the future of the shopping centre, it's quite obvious that these traders have had to trade under adverse conditions for an extended period of time and have continued to survive. What we'd hope that any development that comes forward would enable those traders not only to continue to trade, but to expand the current trading environment.
One of the areas I want to touch on here is actually the affordability of the housing. Councillor Lauder brought up a point earlier of what people actually earn, what can a family actually afford to earn. What was actually brought up, said, was it has to be the average of the ward earnings. Now, when I last checked, East Walworth, the ward this is in, the average earning or the average income of that comes into a household was about 18 to 20,000. So that is the average for the area. These figures that are coming out, what they can afford, what's coming out here, are way over what the average person, existing resident in the area, can afford to do. The only area they can afford is the social part of this, which is only 33 properties, which equates to around about 3.4% of the whole development. That's just not acceptable. It's not anywhere near any of our policies, and it's nowhere near any emerging policies, which would have been tested and worked out before they went into a policy document to be drafted to come to the committee. So I would say at least we meet the emerging, if not meet what is actually what we've got. That's I would deem acceptable. This is nowhere near it on the affordability of the housing, and it's not what local residents in East Walworth and the surrounding area actually need. And the applicant brought up the fact that there's the market for what they want. There's definitely the market for social housing.
And then I guess finally on to all the other things we've mentioned, it's worth saying that we also share the concern around the discussions that are being had over the entrance to the Northern Line station, and these papers do not make it clear that there is actually funding secured to ensure that we get a new entrance to the Northern Line. We therefore think that the idea of talking about the fact that there is going to be a new entrance to the Northern Line is slightly disingenuous when it's not actually in the papers.
I was going to add to my Chair, as regards the discount for the housing. If I understand it correctly, the subsidy comes through the SIL, and if I've understood what's been said so far in the document, the SIL is dependent upon the unit. Have I enough mind in saying that? No. Lost.
SIL's quite a separate issue.
Okay. I won't say any more than that.
Are there any questions?
Oh, hang on, there's one more.
There's just one more point before you ask any questions of us. If you are minded, which we obviously hope you don't, if you can bring the Section 106 to a future planning committee so that we can just double check and check, because there is a lot of ifs and buts, and the applicant said we may look at it, we may provide, we may not do that. There's still a lot of questions going around about this application that need finalising, that we've been told will be sorted out by legal agreement, but I would prefer it if there was some oversight and scrutiny of that process as well.
Are there any questions that anyone? Sorry, Mike, you forgot to remind me. Yeah. Are there any questions Hamish would like to ask? It's not the parking one, is it?
It is. Well, not quite actually. For the east, for the east side, yeah, for the eastern side of the site, it feels like. I mean, parking obviously I'm concerned about as an issue across the board, but actually I think on your side of the site I'm also more concerned about the servicing arrangement and the practical reality of residents in particular being unable to receive deliveries between the hours of 7 AM and 7 PM, which I think were the hours I may have misremembered exactly. Are you able to comment further on the impact of that? Just are you able to comment further on the impact of that?
I can talk kind of in generalities about it. I think what we can say is that we have noticed similar problems arising on the Lend-Lease site, where there is similar problems with servicing and people being able to get deliveries, get access, and it's an issue that we've had to deal with on that site. And what we would really like to see is that these issues are tackled before we get to the point where they become a problem, and therefore if there are things that we can already see are potential problems, like times when people can't have things delivered, that we really need to address those now, not when we finally end up with, which is what we've got, one service bay that's trying to service a load of flats that's off a main road that you can't actually stop in for any period of time.
So are there any specific points, maybe as an additional planning condition or anything that you can think of that we could suggest adding in tonight?
It's all right, Hamish.
I'm sure you can come up with some better ones.
Are there any sorry, before I conclude this by moving, I mean, I've noticed that David wishes to make a point, and I will ask him what point he's going to be making in a second. Are there any further questions anyone would like to ask the east side of the site?
I just have one other. Sorry, you mentioned in your opening remarks about the covenant issue and the long-term sustainability, I suppose, of the affordable housing provision. Are you able to expand a bit further on your views on that and your interpretation of the position as it stands?
Might take a begin.
Get the technician in.
Go.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael.
I suppose I go back to the old Haygate development and observing how that's been managed both by Lend-Lease and indeed by the council. This is an incredibly complex application. My experience with these things suggests that where you have complexity right at the outset, it's a failure highly likely to happen later on. And what that will in effect means is that the current social housing, or indeed a so-called affordable housing element, will change over time by virtue of the fact that people are not going to move homes. Okay, we have yet to see. We've not heard how they would manage it, because they've not been able to explain it here, of all places, how they would manage the scheme. So they've not thought about it yet. It's highly unlikely that we'll arrive at a outcome that you and I would accept. Because as far as the applicant is concerned, once they have planning permission, it's up to the council, therefore, to be the intermediary, and that is highly unlikely in my experience. Therefore, it will disadvantage local people, and what it will mean is that over time, regardless of what I've just heard, over time, the affordable element would in fact contract. And what will happen, you'll find that the community would in fact change over time.
Can I add to that, Hamish? I was going to try and answer your specific point about the covenant. I guess what we were saying is that the council's emerging policy says that they would like the covenant to be held for 30 years. What is the point of us having an emerging policy or an existing policy if we're not even going to hold people to that? So why are we not asking Delancey to at least have it for 30 years? But I think we're then concerned about how it will actually be managed. And to what you were saying earlier, actually, when you start reviewing people's rents and people are moving in and out of different bands, how on earth are we going to keep control of what's going on? And how much money is the council then going to have to invest in the oversight of that to try and make sure that it's being done? And I seem to remember, and planning officers will correct me if this isn't true, but I seem to remember there's also a delay in the time period before which we can even start doing that. So I think it was 7 years, I think, Bridin, you said to me previously, but tell me if I'm wrong, where before we can even start doing this. So we could be in a situation actually where we don't even have management of this from the beginning to understand what's going on and how rents are being reviewed.
No, wait till the thing is finished. You can answer that question. Make a note of it. In line with the comments that were made first. Are there any further questions that anyone would like to ask? David, you were champing at the bit there, wanting to ask. Make a comment, not ask a question.
Yes, it's just that, Chair, when you sent us the list of questions you were going to ask, the last one included lines of questioning, and I wanted to raise some issues around conditions, because there are some conditions which, from the report, which as far as I can see have not been picked up, and I want to ask you to consider those.
David, have you prepared a series of microphone? Sorry, will help strengthen the conditions. And if the answer is yes, could you read them out?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Obviously, my preference is for members to refuse the application, but if you were minded to approve it, the five I just wanted to pick up on page 133, paragraph 446, there's a condition suggesting considered to be scope for further greening of the internal streets, and I'm not clear. I've tried to look through all the conditions, but I can't particularly see that one.
Brilliant.
Condition 2, the one to raise, was the issue around concern about things dropping from, I think it's W2, I believe, the tall tower next to the Metron Tabernacle, and on the southern side of that building having higher balustrades on the southern side and curved tops to the balconies so people can't put things on top of those balconies. That's page 136, paragraph 460. I can't see that condition.
Check design to mitigate through...
microphone, Nick.
Sorry. Yeah, check design.
The third condition, again, I'm struggling to see where it is a condition for an impact study to be imposed in regards to water supply infrastructure. I can't see anything particularly about that. 4 was just reassurance that there will be a detailed environment management plan in regards to demolition and construction. And 5, it's more of a question, but and I've looked to licensing colleagues, but I noticed that the hours on the cultural space are 7 in the morning till 1 a.m. in the morning every single day, and I wonder whether there would normally be restrictions on Sunday, particularly in relation to a venue, or would it normally be the same hours Monday to Sunday?
Yeah, you mean Sunday night to Monday?
Yeah, with the Sunday.
But the Sunday would have shorter hours.
Yeah, no, I understand. Brilliant. Has everyone made a note of those? Brilliant. Are there any further questions, Adele? And then
could I just offer a suggestion about that? I know licensing and planning are different regimes, but maybe that a condition could say something along the lines of that the hours agreed are in line with our licensing policy hours, because we have got hours relating to different things.
Absolutely. We're going to do that next. Does anyone else have any further helpful suggestions that would allow us to move this forward? And if you have, make them very brief. Given the latest of the hour, and we still have a little while to go.
I know there's been some talk about looking at how the reprovision of the bingo hole within the basement X car park that was going to be there. If we can put that as a written condition to make sure it is actually fully explored and a provider is found, if not the other provider. Also, the other which Hamish come up with, which was the car clubs and permits for 3 years. Actually, that was a stroke of genius from him. Sorry.
Hamish, you peaked too early in the year. You've got another 11 months to go. Okay, but I understand.
Microphone!
Yes!
Come on! This isn't good enough. Come on, we can't hear you. And I love your dulcet tones.
Paul, I hadn't realised you were still here. But I now know. Heckles from the rear. I think on that particular point, when that was raised, there was an answer to come up from the officers as to why there was an issue around car clubs, which makes sense. We might not agree with it, but it makes sense. Okay. If there are no further questions, thank you all very much indeed. Well done. We now move into the... That's it on that bit, isn't it? We haven't got anyone else to come up. We now move into the last bit. Are there any further questions of clarification that you would like to ask officers? There are quite clearly some issues around viability that need to be addressed. There were questions around design on Oswin Street. Can we do it in the same order? Which I've now lost a bit of paper with it on. Very helpfully. No, I haven't. St Oswin Street. Are there any questions you'd like to ask officers about the issues raised about Oswin Street? Yeah. Adele?
Yeah, so let's go with Sally, make use of her time here. It's always quite... we're always quite nervous, actually, on the plan. Well, I'm always quite nervous on the planning committee about approving something and having the management plan, traffic management and servicing done at a later stage, because we've got a number of sites around our wards and probably around the borough where it's been an add-on and it's too late. Once its planning application is granted. So, can you tell me about your input on this particular, or your team's input on this particular project in relation to the Oswin Street servicing, management, construction management, and ongoing issues?
Yes. I've written some notes and some questions have come up, so if I follow through what my notes say and then pick up if I haven't addressed anything that's said. We've been heavily involved in very lengthy and challenging discussions. The both from a transport perspective, the east side and the west side are very different and have their own challenges. I guess the first point about the construction access and why that is on Osborne Street, and the point was made about the impact that would have on the public transport network and also on the cycle network, and that was something that is difficult for us to balance that against the residential impact, but something that we felt that needed with TfL and the applicant to be considered. When we did look at the construction access, one of the things that did come up was the safety element, and it is particularly important to cross a cycle facility perpendicular. And it was also the idea that if you have a construction access, then Osborne Street in close proximity, you're then creating more confusion about how the sites are accessed and the interplay between various users. So whilst it's not something that we are entirely thrilled about, there was a decision taken that in terms of construction access it did need to come off Osborne Street. Certainly recognising the situation that Osborne Street residents have been in for some time and will continue to be with this development. So that was the kind of construction side of things. In terms of servicing, and I think that it's important to recognise that there's 3 buildings, and so therefore there is different servicing strategies for each of those. The servicing that comes off Pastor Street will be time restricted, and it is 10 till 4, so it will maintain those restrictions and reduce the impact of overnight deliveries, etc., on the surrounding network. However, the servicing for the mansion block and the pavilion and the tower block will be from Osborne Street. There was some difference of opinion that still need to be worked through, as you can see within the report, about the exact layout of Osborne Street, and I think that is something that we are working through. Just referring back to my notes, in terms of the parking and the residential ownership of vehicles within the new site rather than anything pre-existing, the trip generation that was supplied by the applicant was in line with that industry standards and what we would expect, did not show trip generation to be coming from that, or vehicular trip generation to be coming from that development. And we would look at the constraints we have within the existing CPZ as being a disincentive to car ownership, and the inability to access permits being kind of the ultimate. Within that discussion, there's a question about the reasonableness of asking for further constraints given that background, but certainly welcome the applicant's comments tonight that they're willing to contribute to further reviews of that. I think that is very much in the light, or welcomed in the light of not necessarily the residential issue, but perhaps some of the private hire and nighttime usage that you may see. And I know it's been a particular challenge for some of the streets around the Elephant and Castle. Disabled access within the western side. Because of it is a challenge. It is a challenge that we've seen, particularly in the Northern Borough, about how do you maintain those parking spaces for those units. However, the applicant is coming forward with a different model, and a model that will offer an opportunity to have controls on the retention of that ownership, and that's something that we'd look to put within the 106. So that's something that we would look to do. On the western side, car clubs and then the tabernacle. We have been doing some work in the wider team outside of this application, looking at car clubs and their usage and what their take-up is and how they are used. What we have found is that they very much meet a kind of leisure market, that they are used at weekends and evenings. People often use it as the slang of the IKEA run or the big shop, and they were first introduced to reduce car ownership. We have a scheme here where there is in theory no car ownership, and so therefore what we are offering in terms of access to that is the opportunity to make free additional trips. So it was a decision that we thought that by securing access to the cycle hire, it would offer a an incentive for people to take up that mode share as opposed to car clubs. But it is something that is a new thing, so I appreciate that there may be some discomfort around that, but that was the theory behind not seeking car club membership. No, but there are other models, and there are other models.
Life's too short to discuss why you get all IKEA in the first place.
Well, visit family, or those sort of things. There's other ways of doing it. And the way that people.
Can you just confirm that? Are you saying that's a policy shift of the council, or are you saying that's unique to this scheme?
It's something that we are certainly looking at in sites like this. It is not a borough-wide policy, recognising that in the middle of Bermondsey or the middle of Peckham, indeed, is different to where we are talking here. But given the high PTAL and the highly accessible nature and the community that would be within these developments and what they are buying into, I guess on the flip side, one of the feedback that we've had from some of our car club providers is, whilst there is membership given, that's not translating into uptake and regular usage. So there is a slight disjoint there as well.
I mean, obviously, this is going to veer away into policy, so it's not a matter for tonight. But I, as a councillor, might be quite interested to have a conversation with you at another time about this.
Yes. So the guy from the Tabernacle, the guy from the Tabernacle has gone, and he apologised for not being able to stay any longer.
We as officers most certainly recognise the issues that Tabernacle have. We've met with them on a number of occasions, was referred to in terms of the approach officers took to the CPZ review. They are working within separate sites, within car parking sites, but what they are doing is they're running a kind of logistics program, and what we have offered to do is we have offered to work with them. We've done similar projects with Dulwich College, looking at how they move pupils around. We've done work with businesses within this area, and so we have offered to work with them to look at how they operate and how's their current model. How could it work differently in the future that perhaps has less reliance on those minibuses being proximate to their site. So that's something that we're more than willing to continue to work on. From my notes, I think that is the western side. I think there was one or two on the eastern side. I don't know if you want me to stop there.
No, do the eastern side before, then while you're on a roll.
One of the things that was raised was the Bakerloo line. And we are considering the application as we see it, and I guess there are questions around the Bakerloo line extension and what would that mean. However, there was significant investment in the peninsularisation, which provided the surface level access between the Bakerloo line and the peninsula, and that would remain the solution for people getting from the Bakerloo line to the shopping centre. It is contained within the report paragraph 576. We certainly recognise the constraints and the nature of the residential deliveries on the eastern side, and that was subject to very long and lengthy discussions. What has been agreed is that there will be an alternative location which is easily accessible, and that is to be further progressed through the delivery and servicing plan. But it is something that has been subject of a lot of commentary. A slight kind of personal note was that the DSP for this application and what it contains has been one of the most detailed discussions, and the constraints that need to be in my experience in working in Southwark. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's a lot of control mechanisms that both the council and TfL are looking to secure.
I've got to go. Would anyone dare ask a question after that? Can anyone think of anything Sally's missed out? No. Done. Thank you very much indeed. So we've done St Oswin Street and transport across the site, and we're happy with that, or content at least. Right, thank you very much indeed. The next...
Just send it off.
I know I've just turned it off because I'm just about to think out loud, quite frankly. Is there anything else on Oswin Street that we want to ask, or are we content to go forward?
There's the whole daylight and sunlight issue, and just how extensive the impact will be on those residents.
Yep.
97 of them, I think, or 97 properties, I think.
Absolutely. Who's picking up that one?
I think, as with all these daylight sunlight things, the starting point you go from impacts on how the results will appear. And in this instance, the college, because of its configuration and the fact that it's set back, it's, I suppose, if you like, it's an untypical residential street situation. And so what guided the design of the mansion block along Oswin Street was that very same section that we had up here earlier on, where you look at a mirror image, and that dictated kind of the line behind which the building should stay, so that it would be no worse than if you had built something that was a mirror image of what's existing, which would be to create a typical residential street. And in fact, if you looked at the next street along, I think that is the situation there. So it's a very typical London urban situation. And although the building is taller, it is set back, and it is set back behind that line. So unless you were to leave the site kind of undeveloped or developed to a lower height, the resulting light impacts are what one would normally have expected if that street was built out in the way the neighbouring streets are built. And so that line really kind of influenced the whole design of that mansion block. So the light impacts are noticeable. Nobody is shying away from admitting that. It's there in black and white in the table. And the applicant's expert accepted that it would be noticeable to residents in those buildings, but it's not an untypical situation if they lived on the residential street the next one over, or it's a very typical configuration of residential terraces or streets, London residential terraced streets.
Adele, have you any further questions at this stage of this particular point?
And what about the towers? Do they not have any impact at all?
The thing about the towers is that because they are tall and thin, the light moves around them kind of so that it has less impact than a block that is facing a block. So the shadow line moves all the time.
Are we content to move on to the next block, which is doing it in order? We now move on to questions around viability. How do you want to do this? Do you want to ask Jacob individual questions, or do you want Jacob to actually do a quick summary in the same way? Do you want to, Jacob? Paul, you forgot? Or do you want to do... Or would you prefer Jacob to do a brief summary in the way that Sally did in answer to it, and then we ask questions? Are you content to go that way?
With a list in hand of the points, I've got some of them for the IRR.
We'll start off with your list. Jacob, you need to introduce yourself. That will give you a couple of seconds to actually find your list.
Good evening, Jacob Cutt from GBA. I'm a senior director in the practice and I specialise in viability work and I'm representing the council's interests here. There were a couple of questions. I'm happy to deal with a few more. One of the issues arose was why the scheme's not delivering P4 policy compliant on the emerging policy mix as opposed to the current offer. And the answer to that question is one about risk. We have sorry, excuse me a second. Yes, we have we looked at, and it's in the policy documentation at 366. We did an initial draft report. I mean, I appreciate the offer now is 35%. An initial draft report looking at an initial which had an outturn of on a current day basis of 6.5%, which with growth got you through to that 10 to 12% return. There was subsequent dialogue with the applicant. We have, for the purposes of taking this forward, we have an agreed appraisal which produces on a current day cost, current day value basis, produces an outturn IRR 7.15%. So therefore, to answer the question, why can't it deliver policy compliant? The answer is on the current day cost, current day value, it doesn't stack. It doesn't stack up to deliver policy compliant. With growth allowed for, it will, you know, on the anticipated growth, the forecast growth, it would get there. So what is envisaged is that, so the answer to your question, to the question raised is about risk. If on the basis, on the current day basis and current day cost, it's not viable, that if you took that forward, that would involve the applicant taking the risk of bringing an unviable scheme forward. And should rental growth, for example, stall, though the forecasts don't indicate that at all in central London, where we are, you know, they've got a scheme that's stuck in the mud. The alternative approach is the applicant's offer, which has, I know there was a change, last minute change, and it's improved slightly in the middling range, the BCD range, but the alternative approach is for on the basis of the offers made, it'd be subject to a review mechanism, and what is proposed in the papers. But again, there hasn't been any great discussion about it. The whole discussion of review mechanism has been parked. But what is envisaged is a review. Well, before I come on to the potential for the review mechanism, just to explain, the offer is 35% affordable housing. That is in perpetuity. That is fixed. What flexes is it's almost like a sliding scale on the 35%, so that if the outturn on the scheme is greater than the target RR we're working on, you can reduce the levels of rents. The levels of rents move towards the lower scale, so it will move that direction. So the idea, the objective is to come up with a review mechanism that can deliver that. That can deliver, so it doesn't change the 35%, you just improve the affordability mix, and that you can have more at the lower end of the affordability, more at the lower end of the scale, particularly the social rent equivalent scale.
Can I just, sorry to interrupt you.
No, thanks.
That's exactly the opposite of what the applicant said in response to my question about exactly that point. That's exactly the opposite. I asked them the question as to whether it would concertina down, i.e. a sliding scale moving down and reducing the rent levels, or whether it would, if the growth forecasts that you have put out in the report would mean that there was a reduction in the effectively the market rate rent properties to increase the number of social rent properties, and they replied that was the case.
There's no reduction in the market rate, probably.
Microphone. Sorry, the 35% is fixed.
there's no that stays. The 65% that are market stay market. The 35% stay as classified in perpetuity as affordable housing. The only thing that changes is the level of rents. The rent distribution effectively changes, so that at the moment there is a current offer of this rent distribution. That rent distribution would move towards the lower bands if the scheme outperforms.
Which is what they said in answer to that particular.
Yes.
It's what they said. That's what the applicant said in answer to that question. Is that it shifts towards an increase in the lower rental bands, and you lose the upper rental bands. So you increase.
That's what I heard them say. That's maybe I misunderstood.
No, they're pretty much saying the same thing, but in a different way. In so much as the sliding scale is that this is now broken, shifts this way, so you get fewer of the upper end, and you get more of the social rented, and of the what are they? The London Living Rent bands. As a consequence, and you drop the upper end.
Well, cool, but that surely means that the 35% has to increase, or else you're losing something within that 35% in order to achieve that.
No.
You're losing the discounted market rent, which may be a level for people earning more than £60,000. You lose some of them. They're still affordable. They're not as affordable. You take some of them out and you put more of the more affordable ones in. You keep the same total. You keep the same percentage.
Yeah, it's a 10-year mix.
Basically, the target for any uplift that comes as a result of growth or whatever that we can capture would be applied so that the distribution across what we call the three pots, the kind of the social rent, the London Living Rent, and the kind of the affordable rent, is currently at 10%, 47 and 43. And what we're trying to get to, so in an ideal world, if there was an uplift that got us an IRR of 11%, that would allow a fully compliant mix on a 10-year basis, such that we would have 34% social rent, 52% London Living Rent, and 14% at that top band. So over time we're trying to shift.
Is the 35%.
The 35% quantum, which equates to however many number of units, that is fixed, that is secured in perpetuity. So it's kind of like, that's like the parameters you've got, and within those parameters the rents shift according to any uplift in the or improvement in the IRR, so that the rental distribution changes and moves towards the policy specified rental distribution. So it would probably take time to move towards that, but that would be the goal.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
No, is everyone clear? Sorry, Paul, is everyone clear on that?
Clearer than I was.
Brilliant.
Sorry, Chair. Is that guaranteed? Is that at the discretion of the applicant, or is that sort of automatic? If that threshold is in terms of profit is achieved, then it shifts towards the social rent band A within the 10-year mix, within that 35%.
A lot of the fine detail of how a lot of the fine detail of how one would apply the uplift has yet to be agreed, but and that would be set out in the 106. But the goal is is the goal is crystal clear, because the goal is to get to the tenure split that's identified in emerging policy P4, which is 34, 50, 34, 52, 14. Now, we haven't worked out precisely if you get an increase in the IRR by plus 3% or whatever, what do you do with that pot? I mean, clearly we have an aspiration. We could do it proportionately. So if, I don't know, if there's a couple of percentage increase that we can claw back on, that you would apply it. I mean, we haven't worked out the maths. That we would apply it proportionately so that there is a proportionate increase in both the social rent quantum and our percentage and the London living rent quantum, because obviously what's always going down is the upper grades, the E, F and G, so that's where the shift is coming from. It is very complicated, and I'm sorry if I'm not explaining.
Thank you. So in that ideal world, it would concertina down, so you'd get to the P4 requirement of 34% social rents rather than the existing 10, and that's the emerging P4 policy. And am I right in thinking the existing policy is it should be, of the 35%, it should be 50-50?
Yes.
It's in the traditional, yeah. So even in the ideal world, we're short, but P4, can you just tell us a bit about P4 and when that's supposed to be coming in, and why is that different from traditional?
All right, well, the P4 policy is a draft policy in the draft New Southwark Plan, which is still currently out to consultation, and I think we are due to probably have an inquiry in the summer, and then by the end of the year we would expect that the
Sorry, could you please not interrupt people as they're speaking? It's now getting
Sorry, explanation so that we understand, Mr. Chairman.
So I understand what
the public, but we're entitled to understand.
Could you please not talk over me? What I was going to say is it's now getting rather late in the evening, or in the night, it's nearly early morning, and if you could allow people the time to actually make the explanations to the committee members, and it's for the committee members to be able to come to a conclusion as to whether they understand the explanations that are being made. I do hope you can bear with me on that, please, because we are now getting towards the end of the process, and time has passed, and people are getting a little tireder than they were at 6 o'clock.
This has come down quickly, hasn't it?
So the timetable is that by the end of this year, 2018, the New Southwark Plan the target would be for it to be adopted before the end of the year. And then as it goes through each stage, it gathers more weight. So we're still in a consultation time period. I think that ends towards the end of February, and then by the time you get to the examination in public, more weight is attached to the policies as they proceed, depending on what level of challenge you might have.
So, Adele.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to be really clear that the rents that are set out in here are actual fixed rents for the first 3 years, or are they indicative on the homes? Obviously not on the retail or whatever. But
which rents are you talking about?
So the rents that are suggested, there's a table in here somewhere with rents.
They're indicative.
Oh, they are
rents.
indicative.
I mean, they are what they are now, bearing in mind that we're in 2018. If planning permission is to be granted, by the time the shopping centre would be demolished, the construction would take place, you are probably talking about optimistically, 4 years before occupation could commence, and obviously there will be different rents at that point in time. So they are indicative. They're indicative.
Del, next, and then Sarah.
Yeah, so I just want to, in terms of this reassessing the viability and sort of going back and reviewing it, so the market rents could be quite different, in which case, because these are all percentages of the market rents on the homes. We're talking about in 4 years.
Sorry, the social rents and the London living rents aren't a percentage of, and neither are the top bands. So none of that is.
So in terms of reassessing the viability, how many of the range of different elements are taken into account? So we've got the construction costs and whether or not they are what they, at the end of the project, they are what they say they are. We've got the rentals on the retail and all the other, the D-uses, the sale, transfer, whatever with the LCC. All of those things have to be thrown into the pot. Is that right?
Yeah, it's everything. So probably more a question for David, but we have a viability appraisal that has been given to us. It has been assessed on our behalf, and we have arrived at an agreed viability appraisal. So that is the baseline for any future review. So all of those individual strands will be reviewed. So the build costs, and some things then become known, become actual fixed costs or fixed figures, and so you are comparing like with like when you review, and whereas a number of costs that are figures that go into these appraisals aren't fully known. They are estimates. They have to be reasonable estimates. That's effectively what we're assessing.
Just to add to what Dina said, there haven't been discussions really on the review mechanism, but as pointed out in the notes here, in the documentation, the idea is that the reviews take place post completion, so that you can actually get physical evidence of what the rents are, physical evidence of what the AST, the residential lettings are, the commercial rents. You know what the closure was on the build costs. The other point to make is that this is a phased scheme. Shopping centre site going first. It's years down the road before the other one starts, as you've got to finish the first site so the college can move. So therefore, if you look at it on that basis, we will have outturn information emerging, or the council will have outturn information emerging on the east site, whilst the west site is being built. Evidence will start to emerge of rents, and on the commercial and rents on the residential. So therefore, there is that because you've got two big lumps of development. There's the opportunity already to start re-looking at the potential mix on the west side, depending on the performance of the east side. Because the east side might start to, if it outperforms, you can already start looking at what readjusting. I mean, of course, it's all got to be reflected in the mechanism, but that is the idea. The idea is because it's a phased scheme, you'll have that. There will be that opportunity to think about it and address it.
And the one thing they did commit to was being open with their methodology, their figures, as part of that discussion. So we had it earlier and during the course of the process, rather than just being presented with a set of figures which we then have to understand once the full picture is emerged. We will also understand how it is emerging, and we'll be able to take earlier action rather than responding at a late stage with the presentation of a set of figures that they give us. And they were very clear. They gave us that commitment to be open with us in arriving at those, that the means of assessment, but also the review and looking towards the outcome. Are there any further questions of Jacob? Hamish?
You actually have Sarah first.
Oh, sorry, Sarah. Oh, yes, your name is here. Sarah.
Thank you. I'm conscious we've had quite a lot of discussion tonight about the newness of the model and the risks associated with the model in terms of how it affects, how it sits with emerging policy, how we look at the review mechanism in terms of financial viability, and also it kind of fits into the whole discussion around the rent review process as well. Now, I'm really conscious that obviously where we get to the conclusion on all of those issues needs to be absolutely specific to Southwark. But has any of this discussion and agreement taken place in other places which are comparable to our housing situation in Southwark? In the sense of, is it new to other applications and local authorities that may provide some guidance or reassurance at this point?
I think there are at least 2 other schemes, and I couldn't tell you where they are. I think one might be in Enfield. We have 2 similar areas where we've got Section 106s that we can look at that will assist us, but not necessarily ones that we would copy exactly, because we have our own kind of views and objectives and aspirations, etc. So there are other authorities who are grappling with the complexities of reviewing these kinds of things. So the short answer to your question is yes. I think what we will end up with will be bespoke for Southwark, but we will learn from, because I think we've seen one where we already kind of can see what we think are shortfalls, so we wouldn't. So it's a benefit to us, because if we can see something that doesn't appear to us to be working, then that helps inform us what we think will work better. Sorry.
Just for completeness, we think it's Brent and Enfield where the schemes are emerging, and I think like anything that happens in another planning authority, it may inform what we're doing, but it doesn't necessarily guide, because each and every application is on its own merits, and I think you'll find each and every local authority takes a different approach to how things should do across a range of activities, including planning. And each and every authority does it the best, which always amazes me.
Thanks, Chair. So I just want to be really clear about viability, holding the affordable units in perpetuity, and how that then interacts with the rent level reviews that we were talking about a bit earlier. So if I understand correctly, 35%, if I now understand correctly anyway, 35% of the units within the scheme will be designated as affordable units. There will be, there are current tenure splits within this application. That will be subject to a viability review at some point down the line, probably on completion. At that point, that tenure split will be fixed in perpetuity, or the 35% will still be the only thing which is fixed in perpetuity, and the tenure split could still change 5 years later upon a rent review based on the kind of varying incomes.
Well, the 35% is in perpetuity. Those units are fixed, and I think we do it more by hab room. I think there might be a slight difference, but we will be clear on certainly which the 35% habitable rooms being clearly identified and fixed. And sorry, you said something about, I've lost the last bit of what you said.
There will be.
Oh yeah, the rent, would the rent distribution be fixed? And I suppose it's a good point, and to be honest, I don't think we'd thought about that, but I would say normally, once we have secured an advance, as it were, that gets consolidated. So we're not going to retract from that, and if a further review didn't produce any further upkeep, yes, that would be fixed. But it won't always be fixed, because the upper levels are the ones that are going to basically be relaxed in order to allow the lower levels.
That's within the viability.
Yes. Yes.
So I suppose what I mean is, after the viability review, after the scheme is fully built out and occupied, you have 35% affordable housing fixed for in perpetuity. There will be a 10-year split at that point in time, but because it's a build-to-rent scheme, every 3 years there's going to be a review of the occupants of those 35% units as to whether they should still be receiving a social rent or a London living rent, and what level that's at.
Only on the London living rent.
Okay, sorry, only on the living rent. But my point is, does that shift? Because I mean, presumably, if the same people live in those same properties for 20 years, their incomes are probably going to go up, and over time, the affordable housing provision is just going to evaporate.
I think once we've hit the target of 34, 52, whatever it is, 14, then that I think our intention would be that is fixed. So assume your fixed 35% quantum, your fixed policy, now policy compliant 10-year split, and then you've got people in those units and their circumstances may change, then it is for the operator to ensure that policy compliant distribution of rents is achieved, and they will have to do the balancing acts where some people's incomes might, on the 3-year review, their 3-year lease review, their incomes might take them into a different rent band, so they are going to have to compensate some way or another. But it is very complicated, and we will have to work out how you achieve that objective, because that is an obvious objective.
My final part of this question then is can you provide some assurances to the oversight the council will have in 10, 15, 20 years time to ensure that the tenure mix, which is part of that agreed split there in perpetuity, is adhered to over time and eradicated?
Well, I think we've said it somewhere in the report that we will have, because this is different to the norm, that it does require monitoring, and there will be a monitoring contribution. And I imagine, because this might be the first scheme that the committee has seen, but there's at least one other that's been submitted, and there will be others that follow. So that is a new task that will fall to the council, to the planning department, to monitor in the future this type of residential scheme, and we will have a monitoring fee to cover the costs of actually ensuring that the compliance.
And just to remind you, I did ask that question of the applicant, whether they would be willing for the full open accountability and monitoring of it, not only of the viability at the end to determine whether we get any clawback, but also on the management of the tenancies and the shift between them within that 35% envelope.
And he's nodding to say yes, he agrees with what I said, which is absolutely brilliant. Right, there's at the end of my list. I'm sorry, you got one more? Anyone more?
Sorry, not viability.
Has anyone got anything more on viability? Are we all complete on viability? Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to bingo. Has anyone got any questions on bingo they would like to?
I know that time's getting on, but I am.
Thank you very much indeed. You're excused.
Right.
Is there a way to commit Delancey to keep looking for providing space for bingo?
Well, we have been discussing this with the applicant, and we've recommended that the Section 106 agreement has to include best endeavours to obligate the leisure operators on the site to provide uses which could be akin to bingo or could cater for the same types of clientele. And we've also recommended the feasibility study for the basement to require work to see whether additional space could be included, which could be for leisure and for a bingo hall. And I believe that colleagues in regeneration are also doing a separate piece of work, which I can't advise you about, but I think John can if he's still here, looking at potential locations.
I think just on the bingo, and this has been a fascinating discussion. I think the position has hardened in terms of everyone has recognised the importance of it. I think the other bit is the Lancey and the council is quite happy for any operator to make use of the D2 space, which is space that has the land use designation for bingo and other leisure uses. So at this stage, in taking this decision, unless anyone advises me differently, there is nothing to prevent a bingo operator coming forward to actually say we would want to run this D2 leisure space as a bingo club. The one bit that we have done and strengthened throughout the discussion around the retail and about the leisure uses, I believe, unless anyone would come up with a different view, is we, I think, have consolidated through the discussion the importance of the protected status and the activities that those groups within the protected status wish to engage in. And some of that is about socialising and providing space that is appropriate for it. And any of the future operators are expected to be fully cognizant that there is a group of people who have the protected characteristics, the BME, and that's it, isn't it? Communities whose in the day-to-day activity of the managing of the centre across a whole range of activities, their interests are looked into. There is nothing at this stage to stop a bingo operator coming forward and engaging with Delancey to say we are really interested in using that D2 space to locate our future bingo operation in. Is that a reasonably accurate summation? And does everybody understand that? And I'm getting nods from here, from not quite a nod there. Am I getting a nod?